Why do women start to dislike their husbands as they get older? Advice from old people. Aging changes everything, including relationships. The bond that once felt unshakable can start to feel heavy, frustrating, or even lonely. Many older women, after decades of marriage, find themselves questioning their feelings toward their husbands. It's not always about falling out of love. It's about realizing what love should feel like and what it has become. As years pass, small disappointments pile up, emotional needs remain unmet, and the person they once adored can start to feel like a distant roommate rather than a life partner. If you are a husband, a wife, or someone simply curious about long-term relationships, this might change the way you see love, aging, and marriage forever. Let's dive into the real reasons why women start to dislike their husbands as they get older, and what can be done before it's too late. 1. A life built around him, but not with him. For decades, many women devote themselves to building a life, not necessarily for themselves, but for their husbands. They make sacrifices, often without hesitation, putting aside personal ambitions, friendships, and even pieces of their identity to support the man they married. It happens gradually, subtly, in small ways that don't seem significant at the time. Choosing his career over her own aspirations, rearranging her schedule to accommodate his needs, managing the household so he can focus on his work, making sure he is comfortable, well fed, cared for, while often neglecting her own well-being. At first, it feels like love, and in many ways it is. But over time, something shifts. As the years pass, she realizes that her life has become an extension of his. His dreams were pursued, his preferences were prioritized, his comfort was ensured. But where does that leave her? This realization doesn't come all at once. It comes in quiet moments, in the stillness of the house when the children have grown and moved away, in the long silences at the dinner table where conversations have dwindled to nothing but routine remarks, in the feeling of exhaustion, not just from physical labor, but from years of being the foundation upon which everything else was built, and perhaps most painfully, in the growing awareness that while she spent her life supporting him, he never truly did the same for her. It's not always that the husband was neglectful or unkind. Sometimes it's simply that he never saw her sacrifices as sacrifices at all. He assumed that love meant she would always take care of things, that she found fulfillment in the role of caregiver, that she never needed more than what he provided. But love is not just about duty. It's about reciprocity. And when a woman spends a lifetime giving without receiving, a quiet resentment begins to grow. Not an explosive, dramatic kind of anger, but a slow-burning realization that she has poured herself into a marriage that has never quite poured itself back into her. By the time a woman reaches her later years, this feeling can be overwhelming. She doesn't necessarily want to leave, but she also doesn't want to keep living this way, constantly putting herself second, constantly feeling like her role in the relationship is to serve, not to be cherished. It's not that she suddenly dislikes her husband. It's that she realizes how much of herself she has lost in the process of loving him. And when she looks at him now, she doesn't just see the man she married. She sees the life she could have had if things had been different. So, what can be done? It starts with recognition. Husbands must understand that their wives have existed as more than just their partners. They have been individuals with their own dreams, desires, and inner lives. It means asking, really asking, what she needs, what she wants, who she wants to be, now that there is space for her to reclaim herself. It means acknowledging, with sincerity, that she was never just there. She was the reason everything worked in the first place. And above all, it means making room for her now, before the distance becomes too great to bridge. Because love at its core is not about how much someone gives, it's about how much both people choose to share. 2. The emotional distance grows while the physical presence increases. There was a time when conversations flowed effortlessly, when the sound of his voice was something she longed to hear at the end of each day. They would talk about their dreams, their worries, the little moments that made up their lives. There was curiosity, warmth, and a desire to understand each other. But somewhere along the way, the dialogue changed. It became practical, predictable. The questions that once carried weight, how are you feeling? Or what are you thinking about? Faded into routine exchanges about bills, doctor's appointments, and dinner plans. The silence between them, once comfortable, began to feel heavy. As the years pass, the emotional distance grows in ways that neither of them fully acknowledges. He is still there, sitting in his usual chair, watching the same television shows. She moves around the house, doing the same tasks she has done for decades. They occupy the same space, yet they feel miles apart. What was once a relationship full of conversation and connection now feels more like two parallel lives running side by side, but never quite touching. The loneliness creeps in slowly. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being unseen. She still has thoughts, feelings, things she wants to share, but when she speaks, she wonders if he's truly listening or if he's just waiting for her to finish talking. She starts to keep things to herself, not because she doesn't want to share, but because she has learned that his response will likely be indifferent, distracted, or absent altogether. And after a while, she stops trying. The less she shares, the more invisible she feels. The more invisible she feels, the more resentment grows. It's not that she expects grand romantic gestures or constant deep conversations. She just wants to feel like she still matters to him, like she is still someone worth knowing. She doesn't want to be an afterthought in her own marriage, a familiar presence that fades into the background. She wants to be acknowledged, to be asked how she's really doing, to be met with interest rather than routine politeness. She wants to feel like she is not just living alongside him, but truly with him. The cruel irony of aging in a long-term marriage is that just as the physical presence of a husband increases, especially after retirement, the emotional presence often disappears. Suddenly, they are together more than ever, yet she feels more alone than she did when they were young and busy. The long hours of the day stretch on, filled with small talk, silence, or conversations that lack depth. It becomes clear that being in the same room does not mean being emotionally close. But this kind of distance is not inevitable. It is a choice, often an unconscious one, but a choice nonetheless. If a husband truly wants to close the gap, he must be willing to step outside of his comfort zone. He must put down the remote, look his wife in the eyes, and ask her something real. He must remember that love is not about simply existing next to each other, but about actively choosing to engage. Because in the end, the saddest thing is not losing a spouse. It's losing the connection with the person who was supposed to be your closest companion. And for many women, that loss happens long before the marriage ever ends. 3. They're tired of being the only one, making an effort. In the early years of marriage, love felt effortless. Both partners contributed, both tried to impress, both found joy in the little things they did for each other. But as time went on, something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the weight of maintaining the relationship began to fall more and more on her shoulders. She became the one who remembered anniversaries, the one who planned family gatherings, the one who made sure their life together stayed connected, meaningful, and full of love. At first, she did it willingly, believing that effort in a marriage should not be measured equally but given freely. But over time, she began to notice something unsettling. She was the only one still trying. He had grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. The little gestures he used to make, the small surprises, the thoughtful words, the moments of deep attention had disappeared. She still reached out, still made an effort to keep their bond alive, but he no longer met her halfway. Conversations felt one-sided, affection became predictable, and romance turned into a distant memory. It wasn't that she expected dramatic declarations of love or extravagant gifts. She simply wanted to feel like she still mattered to him in a way that wasn't just routine. But the more she tried, the more exhausting it became. After years of being the one to initiate, to plan, to care, she began to wonder, what would happen if she stopped? If she didn't remind him of their anniversary, would he even remember? If she didn't plan date nights, would he ever suggest one? If she stopped reaching out to hold his hand, would he ever reach for hers? And as these questions settled in her mind, a painful truth emerged. He had stopped putting in effort because he assumed she always would. There is a unique kind of loneliness that comes from being in a relationship where only one person is actively keeping it alive. She didn't want to beg for attention, to constantly ask for the simplest gestures of love that should come naturally. She wanted to be seen, to be appreciated without having to remind him of her worth. She wanted to feel like their marriage was a partnership, not a responsibility that had become hers alone. She knew that love wasn't always easy, that relationships required work, but she also knew that love was not meant to be one-sided. She wanted to feel cherished, not just accommodated. She wanted to know that after all these years, she was still someone her husband wanted to make an effort for, not just someone he had grown used to. The sad reality is that many men don't realize the depth of this problem until it's too late. They assume that just because their wife has always been the one to hold things together, she always will. They don't notice the slow withdrawal, the quiet detachment, the emotional exhaustion that builds with each unreciprocated effort. And one day, she stops trying. Not out of anger, not even out of sadness, but out of sheer fatigue. She simply has nothing left to give. But it doesn't have to end that way. A husband who truly cares must be willing to meet his wife where she is, to put in the effort, not because she demands it, but because he values her. A simple acknowledgement, a sincere gesture, a reminder that she is loved and appreciated. These things can make all the difference. Because no woman wants to spend her final years feeling like she is holding up a marriage alone. She wants to be reminded that she is still worth fighting for, still worth choosing, still worth the effort. 4. They feel more like a caregiver than a wife. Marriage is built on love, commitment, and the promise of standing by each other's side in sickness and in health. In the beginning, those vows are spoken with conviction, but few young couples truly understand what they mean until the later years. As time passes, bodies grow weaker, illnesses arise, and daily routines are no longer as simple as they once were. For many women, the role of a wife slowly transforms into something else. She becomes a caregiver, not just a partner. At first, she embraces this role with love. She schedules doctor's appointments, manages medications, and watches over him with quiet devotion. She makes sure he eats well, encourages him to take care of himself, and helps him through the discomfort of aging. She does these things not out of obligation, but because she cares deeply. But as the years stretch on, something inside her shifts. She realizes that while she has dedicated herself to his well-being, no one is truly looking out for her. Her exhaustion is not just physical, but emotional. The man she once leaned on is now leaning entirely on her. And while she never expected marriage to remain the same as it was in youth, She also never imagined that she would feel so alone within it. It is not just the caregiving itself that wears her down, but the unspoken expectation that she will do it without question, without rest, without recognition. She begins to feel more like a nurse than a wife, more like a service provider than a cherished companion. What makes it harder is that many men do not recognize the toll this takes on their wives. They do not see the way she pushes through fatigue, the way she carries the silent weight of responsibility, the way she sacrifices her own comfort to ensure his. He may be grateful in his own way, but gratitude is not always expressed. He assumes she will always be there, just as she always has been. But she begins to wonder, if the roles were reversed, would he do the same for her? Would he carry her burdens as selflessly as she carries his? This is not to say that she resents caring for him. Love, after all, is shown through action. But she longs for something more than just being useful. She longs to be held, to be asked how she is doing, to be given the space to be vulnerable too. She wants to feel like his wife again, not just someone responsible for making his life easier. The truth is, many women suffer in silence. They do not complain because they feel guilty for feeling this way. They remind themselves that this is what marriage is, standing by each other even when it is hard. But deep inside, they wish for a small moment where they are the ones being taken care of, where their needs are seen and acknowledged. For husbands, the greatest gift they can give is recognition. A simple thank you is not enough. They must acknowledge her sacrifices, lighten her burden in whatever way they can, and most importantly, make her feel loved beyond the role of caretaker. Because a woman does not stop needing affection just because she has become a caregiver. She does not stop longing to be desired, appreciated, and valued as a partner. And if she is made to feel like her only purpose is to care for him, eventually the love that once bound them together may fade into quiet resentment. 5. The loss of physical and emotional intimacy. Love is not just about companionship. It is about connection, both physical and emotional. In the early years, intimacy is effortless. There are stolen glances, lingering touches, and an unspoken language of closeness. Even in the chaos of raising a family, juggling careers, and navigating life's uncertainties, there is still a warmth that keeps the bond alive. But as the years go by, many women begin to feel a slow and painful shift. The affection that once felt natural now feels like a memory. The touch that used to ignite something inside her has become rare, and worse, absent altogether. At first, she tells herself that this is normal. Life gets busy, bodies change, priorities shift. But as time passes, she begins to feel not just physically distant from her husband, but emotionally unseen. Intimacy, after all, is not just about physical closeness. It is about feeling desired, cherished, and valued. It is about the way he looks at her, the way he reaches for her, the way he makes her feel like she is still the woman he once couldn't live without. And when that feeling fades, so does a part of her. She notices how easily he settles into routine, how he no longer takes the time to make her feel special. He assumes that after all these years, words of love are unnecessary, that she already knows how he feels. But love is not something that can be assumed. It needs to be shown, reinforced, and nurtured, no matter how many years have passed. She doesn't expect grand gestures, but she longs for the simple things. The touch of his hand on hers, the way he used to hold her when she was feeling low, the moments where he looked at her and truly saw her, not just as a wife, but as a woman. As physical intimacy fades, so does emotional intimacy. Conversations become transactional. The deep, meaningful exchanges they once shared are replaced with discussions about household matters, health concerns, or the events of the day. The warmth in his voice when he spoke to her has been replaced by a tone of routine, and she begins to wonder, when did they stop being lovers and become just two people sharing the same space? She knows that age brings changes. She doesn't expect to feel the same passion as when they were young. But she also knows that love is not just about age or circumstance, it is about effort. She has seen other couples, even in their later years, still finding ways to express affection, still making each other feel wanted, and she realizes that it is not time that has stolen their intimacy, it is neglect. The most heartbreaking part is that many men don't even notice when their wives begin to pull away. They don't recognize the shift from longing to indifference, from disappointment to quiet acceptance. They assume she has simply changed, that she no longer needs closeness the way she once did. But the truth is, she does. She always has. For intimacy to survive, it must be actively maintained. A simple kiss on the forehead, a genuine compliment, an arm wrapped around her waist while they sit together. These are the things that keep a marriage alive. They are the silent reminders that she is still loved, still wanted, still important. A woman does not stop longing for intimacy just because years have passed. She only stops longing when she realizes she is longing alone. 6. Retirement changes. Everything, but not always for the better. For years, retirement is imagined as a golden chapter, a time of freedom, relaxation, and finally enjoying life without the burdens of work. Couples picture themselves traveling, taking long walks together, rediscovering hobbies, and simply enjoying each other's company. But for many women, the reality of retirement is far from what they expected. Instead of feeling liberated, they feel overwhelmed. Instead of gaining a new sense of peace, they feel trapped in a life that suddenly feels smaller, not bigger. The shift happens gradually. When a husband retires, he often struggles to adjust. He has spent decades defining himself by his career, his routines, and the structure that work provided. Without it, he feels lost, unanchored. And in many cases, he turns to his wife, not as a partner in this new stage of life, but as his source of entertainment, his organizer, his caretaker. She suddenly finds herself filling the empty spaces in his day, expected to create purpose for him when he hasn't created it for himself. At first, she tries to be patient. She understands that retirement is an adjustment for both of them. But as time passes, the weight of his newfound dependency starts to feel suffocating. She spent years managing the home, raising children, and holding everything together. She thought retirement would finally give her the chance to breathe, to focus on her own interests, to enjoy some independence within their marriage. But instead, she finds herself with even less space than before. She watches as he struggles to find hobbies, to build friendships, to create a life outside of her. She encourages him to explore, to engage with the world, to find something that excites him. But if he refuses, if he simply settles into expecting her to fill the void, resentment begins to take root. She doesn't want to feel like his only source of fulfillment. She doesn't want to spend her final years managing someone else's boredom. The truth is, retirement does not automatically bring couples closer. It magnifies whatever is already there. If the marriage was built on strong communication, mutual respect, and shared interests, retirement can be a beautiful chapter. But if the relationship has relied on routine and obligation rather than genuine connection, retirement can expose cracks that have long been ignored. For a marriage to thrive in retirement, both partners must have their own sense of purpose. A husband must recognize that his wife is not responsible for his happiness. Just as she spent years creating a life beyond just being his wife, he must now do the same. Because a woman who has carried the weight of responsibility for decades will not want to carry her husband's uncertainty too. She will want a partner, not a burden. And if she feels like she is losing herself in the process, she may begin to pull away, not because she doesn't love him, but because she refuses to lose herself any further. 7. She no longer feels heard or appreciated. There was a time when she felt like her words mattered. When she spoke, her husband listened, not just with his ears, but with his heart. He cared about her thoughts, her worries, her dreams, and even the smallest details of her day. He noticed the way she hesitated before making a decision, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved. But over the years, that attentiveness faded. At first, it was subtle. He started responding with distracted nods, half listening while watching television or reading the newspaper. Then it became clearer. She would share a story only for him to forget it moments later. She would express a concern only to be met with indifference. She would try to have a real conversation only to feel like she was talking to someone who had already checked out. It wasn't just about big discussions or serious talks. It was about the little things. The way he used to ask about her day, the way he once noticed when she was upset without her having to say a word. Over time, she realized she had stopped sharing certain things because it felt pointless. Why open up when she knew she wouldn't truly be heard? The silence grew, and with it, so did her loneliness. But the worst part was not just feeling unheard, it was feeling unappreciated. She had spent years, decades even, making sure their life ran smoothly. She remembered the birthdays, the doctor's appointments, the names of their grandchildren's teachers. She took care of the home, their well-being, their family. And yet, it often felt like none of it was noticed. It was expected. She did not need grand gestures or constant praise. She simply wanted acknowledgement, an occasional thank you, a moment of recognition, a sign that he still saw her for who she was, not just for what she did. But when that never came, when she realized that her efforts had become invisible, she slowly began to withdraw. What many men fail to understand is that women do not stop caring overnight. They stop caring when they feel like their presence, their voice, their very being no longer matters to the person they have spent their life with. And once that feeling takes hold, it is difficult to undo. It is not too late to change. A marriage can survive many things, but it cannot survive silence and indifference. She doesn't want grand speeches or extravagant gestures. She just wants to feel valued again. To feel like when she speaks, someone is truly listening. Because the moment she stops trying, the love she once gave so freely does not turn into hate. It turns into quiet, painful detachment. And that is how love, slowly but surely, fades away. Final thoughts. Love is a choice every single day. Love does not disappear in a single moment. It fades slowly in the spaces where words are left unsaid, in the small gestures that are no longer made, in the quiet acceptance of routines that no longer bring joy. It vanishes not because two people stop caring, but because they stop noticing each other, stop noticing the effort that is needed to keep a marriage alive. A woman does not wake up one morning and decide she no longer feels the same about her husband. It happens over years of being unseen, unheard, and unappreciated. It happens when she realizes she is carrying the weight of the relationship alone. It happens when she understands that the love she has given so freely has not been nurtured in return. She does not leave because she does not love. She withdraws because she has spent too many years asking for something that was never given. But it does not have to be this way. Love at its core is not about grand romantic gestures. It is about presence. It is about choosing every single day to see each other, to hear each other, to acknowledge that even after decades, effort still matters. Love is not something that can be placed on a shelf and expected to last. It must be tended to, cared for, and cherished. A husband who wants to keep his wife from growing distant must ask himself one simple question. When was the last time I made her feel truly valued? Not just in words, not just in duty, but in action. Because love is not lost in a single moment. It is lost in the moments we stop trying. And just as it fades, it can be reignited. If only we choose to see, to listen, and to love each other the way we once did. These lessons are meant to inspire you to live fully and authentically. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Take a moment to reflect and share one thing you've learned and plan to apply in your own life. Let's support each other on this journey toward embracing these truths. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment with 1. If not, feel free to comment with 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life on your own terms.